Welcome to Yale College Voices, the podcast where we explore stories, experiences, and insights of all of our remarkable individuals within the Yale College community. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm your host, Darice Corey, and today I have a wonderful guest, Joel Silverman, who is the Director of Academic and Educational Affairs for Yale College. So welcome, Joel.
Thank you, Darice.
Yes,
I'm very glad to be here. I have to say I was nervous about this.
Were you?
I'm nervous about talking to myself, and I have historically not been good as an interviewee when it comes to jobs.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I know you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope I get the position, but I was so reassured by the fact that you're doing this because,
awesome.
Well, I remember our meetings.
Right.
246 Church,
Yes.
pre-pandemic.
Yes, I know.
And you have this quality that a lot of our successful residential college deans have, which is just a very calming presence.
Really?
So yes. So when there were problems that came up in those meetings, and whatever the problem was, you answered it, and I thought it's going to be okay.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. And I know that was so long ago. It's hard to imagine that was 2018, 2019, somewhere around there.
It really feels like forever.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah, it does. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I promise I don't bite, you know. And yeah, I just, I'm flattered to hear that because yeah, I mean, I want this to feel like just a comfortable place, but safe space, that kind of thing. And that's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So Joel, I want to just read your bio that you shared with me, and then we'll just chit chat.
All right. Excellent.
Awesome. So as I mentioned earlier, Joel Silverman is the Director of Academic and Educational Affairs for Yale College. In this role, he helps edit, interpret, and oversee Yale College's academic regulations and answers questions from the 14 residential college deans about student petitions and requests for academic accommodations. Joel also trains new residential college deans in the academic component of their work. Together with Yale College Voices alum Ferenc Lafargue, Joel co-teaches Dean School, which is the year-long training program for all new college deans. I didn't realize that. Prior to assuming his current position in 2017, Joel was himself the dean of Morse College for 10 years, and he taught in the departments of English and American Studies. He earned his PhD in American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Joel is a native nutmegger. For those of you who don't know, that means Connecticut. Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
In case I got that wrong, I'm like, wait a minute, I know I am too. Wait a second.
Yeah.
So Joel is a native nutmegger, but he met his spouse while studying abroad in Spain as an undergraduate, and he is thus an enthusiastic proponent of study abroad and a huge fan of Spanish food, flamenco music, and movies by Almodovar.
Yeah.
I always get that right. In 2022, Joel published The Legal Exhibitionist, Morris Ernst's, did I pronounce that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Morris Ernst's Jewish Identity and the Modern Celebrity Lawyer, which his mom has read cover to cover. You got to appreciate moms who support us, right? He also contributed to and edited Real College, Strategies for Success for the Modern Student, a textbook for first-year students, which is scheduled for publication by Broadview Press in spring 2025. Joel and his wife have a 23-year-old son who is a student at the University of Connecticut, as well as two very energetic and vocal dogs. And Joel also enjoys crossword puzzles, long walks with his puppies, meals made by his wife, who is a professional chef. That's awesome. I've always wished I could.
Me too.
And binge watching detective shows and documentary series. And I can't wait to hear what your favorite series are. So, so welcome,
Thank you,
Joel.
Darice. Thank you.
It's so awesome to have you here. And as you mentioned, I mean, we've collaborated over the years. It's hard to imagine that it's been. I think when I started in a dean's office, you were at Morse, if
I
I'm
think
not
so. Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I loved about those meetings, and I miss a little bit with Zoom is,
Mm,
you know, we had you and I had email correspondence,
right.
but I never really even had met you.
Wow.
And then we started having these meetings together, and that was great. There's sometimes in Yale College, even when we have those all staff meetings, you just
Mhm.
forget how many people are part of this office
Right, right.
and how many people are working together or behind the scenes on you know Yale College and Yale
Mhm,
University goals.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's hard, I think that's something that I enjoy, aside from my actual work, that's something that I do enjoy is just learning about, all of the collaboration and the teamwork that goes into,
Yeah.
these events that look like, oh, it was easy, but it really,
Right.
all of
Right.
the behind the scenes work that's involved in the people, and it's really amazing how it just all comes together. Um, so yeah, I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit more about, how you're growing up in Connecticut and
hmm
your early years. So if you don't mind sharing about that.
Well, I think, in thinking about this and prepping for this, I was thinking about about myself in ways that I hadn't before.
Oh,
Because some of the questions, um, even though we definitely don't have to go, I mean, I love having just the
hmm
conversation,
hmm
but the questions that you had posed initially made me think about things in a different way. And one thing I had been thinking about was, you know, how did I get here? How did I,
right, right.
what was it? And was there something or some things about my childhood upbringing, et cetera, that, led to me being where I am?
hmm
And in thinking about um, my my child, and I swear I've never thought about this before, but um, my father was an attorney.
hmm
My mother is a social worker,
hmm
and those are two components that feed into
Mm,
being a residential college dean, and
right.
certainly in my role right now,
Yeah, yeah.
in terms of understanding and interpreting
hmm
regulations, aka law,
Right.
rules,
Yes.
um, and the social work component where you're really taking a counseling or even pastoral position
Yeah.
with college students,
Right.
and sometimes, frankly, because the job of a residential college dean is difficult.
hmm
Um, Sometimes with colleagues too.
hmm hmm
It is a challenging position. The residential college dean. Not that mine isn't challenging,
Right,
but
right. In a different way.
in a different way. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm no longer 24/7,
Yeah.
and I used to have nonstop interaction with students,
Yes. Yes.
and now I have my few advisees,
hmm
and I'm not teaching, and so it's not. I still hear and feel about the challenges that our students are
hmm
facing, and
hmm
I'm very um, aware of those, but that's very different than having that student right
Yeah.
in front of you and you
Right.
feeling, oh my gosh, what can I do to
Yeah.
help?
Right, right. I can imagine,
Yeah,
especially like you said, in those moments where, it may be all sorts of emotions,
yep,
involved and whatever's going on for the student and having to react to that or do something to help must be, it's high pressure,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So that's interesting because, in past interviews, or my past guests, it seems like it's really fascinating how everyone had some sort of childhood thing that just led to their interests,
Yeah.
later in life, and what they're, actually doing here at Yale College today. So it's like it started early on in terms of what you were exposed to, right? Like you said, with both your parents and the fields that they were working in.
But not consciously. I mean,
Right.
and I was thinking too about, I am culturally Jewish.
Hmm.
I was raised Reform, um, um, and for non-Reform Jews, that's a lot of that is um, the main holidays. Um, Getting because I grew up in a area that did not have a lot of Jewish students or staff. Um, uh, Getting the high holy days off
Hmm.
from school public school when everybody else had to go.
Hmm. Oh, interesting.
Um, and not, I mean, feeling like I was Jewish, but not in a way that I've really come to understand, because the book that was based on my doctoral dissertation was a lot about or at least underlying Jewish culture, American Jewish culture. And I was telling my wife this just the other night, and I don't think I shared this before, and it wasn't something that I was hiding or suppressing, but I was thinking about the fact that there wasn't a lot of diversity in the town. I was born in Norwalk. We moved to Wilton, Connecticut. My parents had the wherewithal to do it, and they wanted better school system for the three of us. So three boys. My oldest brother Jonathan, my middle brother Jason, and I was the baby.
Oh, interesting.
And Darice, I have to show you. I have to send you this photo that is of the three of us in full 70s garb, big collars, big
Really?
white collars, absolutely flamboyant, red
Yeah.
suits. We're all dressed the same. I mean, and it's from when I was a kid because I had a full head of blonde curly hair.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. But I had this experience when I was in seventh grade, where I was eating with some friends in the school cafeteria, and I felt something, and I looked around and I didn't see anything, and then I felt something again, and heard it drop to the ground, and it was a penny, and these kids were like, throwing pennies at me. And a friend at the table who was not Jewish quickly ran to pick up the money that was coming down. And I just felt like, don't go there. You can't do that, because that's feeding into a stereotype, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I went in the direction that I went, which I never had any idea of what a dean was or how but in terms of that I ended up in that role because that is a lot of connecting with people who are totally different from you.
Yeah.
I mean, the pride of Yale colleges and institutions like it is the ability to have a tremendously diverse student body. And to be successful, you need to connect with them.
Right.
And so I guess at some point I developed some sort of sensitivity to that, and also the intellectual interest,
Right.
So I never could have predicted that I'd be where I am now. I mean, all of these different things that happen. I think you said things that you were exposed to, and I think that's absolutely right. There was no. I don't remember if you remember the Baby Box series, or there were these videos which we showed our son when he was just a toddler. I mean, just for fun, but they play classical music, and you're exposing the little kid, and it's sort of like,
Baby Einstein.
Baby Einstein.
Like
yes,
yeah.
yes.
I remember.
Yes, I love those videos.
Yeah, me too. I actually enjoyed watching it with him.
We'll have to dig up those YouTubes and share.
Yeah.
But I mention this because it's like there's nothing that would have been okay. Take step A, B, and C, and you will end up being a residential college dean at Yale, and then director of academic and educational affairs. There was just no way I could have seen this. But yet, when I look back at my life and I look at the highs and lows and what I was exposed to, I can see, this kind of explains, why I like to connect with other people in this way, and why I feel for people who go through certain things, and it just at least a little bit helps explain me to me.
Yeah, that's fascinating because like you said, it's like having that experience. And you said that was in 7th grade.
Yeah.
And I can even think back to instances where they continue. It doesn't just go away, but it just has such an impact that you just find yourself like these are the things that are important to you because you don't want someone else to feel the way you might have felt that day.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And that's fascinating. What you mentioned you had 2 brothers and you were the youngest, and so I'm the youngest too. So I'm curious. I'm curious if you had like the youngest child. I don't want to call it syndrome, but it's like, my siblings still tease me to this day.
Yeah.
They pick on me. So I'm curious if you experience the same with your siblings.
Absolutely.
Really?
But some of that was, I still have this memory of one of my older brothers, probably my middle brother, sort of ruefully saying, when I was his age, I had to go to bed at 7:00 or something.
Yes,
and, by then it's 9:00. I remember when, before we had our son, reading some of these sort of pregnancy and birth books. And there was a writer who had talked about having 3 kids, and the first one, the baby, it's like the pacifier touches the floor,
and you freak out.
You freak out, and it's like you boil it for 2 hours, make sure it's absolutely sanitized, make sure it's totally cooled down to give it to them.
Yep.
The second one,
you kind of do
pick it up, do that. And the third one, just put it right back in their mouth.
It's like 5 seconds.
Yeah. I did not.
True.
I did not at all feel neglected. But I definitely had some freedoms that my older brothers didn't have. But we all now get along really, really well as adults, happily. And my oldest brother has been a mentor of mine in a sense, because I've kind of, he's 6 years older than me. I've kind of followed aspects of his career. We were both, he first went to University of Texas at Austin, UT Austin. Where's the camera? I'll do this. And studying American Studies. And I applied to a few programs, but I went and visited him and liked it and ended up following him there.
That's awesome.
We both got our doctorate there. The textbook that you mentioned, Yale College, he was the coordinator of all of that. Yeah. And it was really nice too, because it was a chance. He had stayed in touch with these grad students who were sort of in, his class. I mean, around the time that he came in, older, different class than me, but we all started collaborating on this, and it was really nice to sort of get together
Yeah.
back with those grad student colleagues, and he has he's the one I used to send my cover letters to, or my mother is not the only one that read the book cover to cover. Also, my
Right,
brother.
your brother.
Because
Awesome. Yeah, that's so great. And congratulations on the book, by the way.
Thank you.
Both books. And so the second one, The Real College, so that's coming out spring 2025. What was there something early on? I know we mentioned your parents, but was there something that, in addition to your brother's influence, kind of sparked your interest in pursuing your PhD?
Well, I had this sort of vague idea when I was a kid that I wanted to be a writer, and I actually, like your former guest Ference, I wrote for newspapers. I wrote for newspapers in high school, and then I wrote for a local paper in Reading, Connecticut, called the Reading Pilot, and that was fantastic. And it was, again, a way to meet lots of different people. That was when I was an interviewer.
Yes.
I was at the time much more comfortable on that side of the
Really?
microphone. And I studied in college English, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I sort of had a vague sense that I might want to teach, but I didn't really have experience teaching. And so I will say I don't know that I had everything fully thought out when I went to graduate school. Right? I mean, worked out great, ended up great. I'm very, very happy to have published a book. It was a culmination of a lot of years and a lot of work.
Right.
But I don't think that there was. I don't think I really knew what was going to happen. I was just like, this is a way for me to write something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So was there, is there something about writing that, that's sort of therapeutic for you, or what, you know what I mean? Like what draws you to it? Is there something that, do you find the research part fascinating, or is it, I don't know, like, is it just a matter of getting your thoughts on paper, so to speak?
I was going to joke, Darice, that nothing draws me to it.
Really?
I'm repelled from it.
Really?
Well, but you mentioned research, and that I had one of my best years in grad school was the year I spent in the archives in the Ransom Center in Austin, Texas. The guy I wrote about, I found out about him through a friend who actually worked at the Ransom Center and said, this guy, he's Cold War, you're interested in that. He's Jewish, you're interested in that. There's some civil liberties. You should check him out. And it was this archive of 900 mostly uncatalogued boxes.
Oh, wow.
So from day to day, you never knew what you were going to find.
Yeah.
So you're going in there and you're touching these pieces of paper that were being created and read in 20s, 30s, 40s, and you find things like a letter from Groucho Marx to your guy who's saying, hey, come on out and swim in the pool or something like
goodness.
that. Just and it was just really, really cool. And so I love that. And in thinking about, I don't want to take a different route than I have taken, and I really am happy where I am. But when I sometimes think about what might have been, other ways I might have gone. I think one of them I actually think about, library science.
Really?
Yeah, being an archivist.
Uh-huh.
And the other, which might not necessarily seem to be along those lines, is some sort of therapist or
Oh,
something like that.
interesting.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Like two totally different
Totally
things,
different.
right?
Yeah. But that just drives what I've found really, the work that I've done that I found really satisfying, fulfilling.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm curious, and even with you just saying that, again, it kind of speaks to what you were exposed to growing up.
Yeah.
Like your mom
Yep.
working in social work and
Right.
dad as an attorney, and
Yep.
wow, that's fascinating. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, how did you end up studying abroad in Spain?
Well, I was pretty fortunate to have a very kind Spanish teacher because, I mean, I'm fluent now, and I've actually worked as a translator
Oh, I didn't
years
know that.
ago, but my Spanish was terrible.
Really?
I mean, it was terrible to the point where I went to the professor who sort of had to sign off on it, and I said, I don't know if I can do this, and she said, you can do it.
Really?
And I remember after this is my first trip to Europe, and a trip overnight and everything, and I got off the plane and I was just feeling totally jet lagged. I explained it to people at the time. I felt like not in like a good way or a spiritual way, but I just felt like I was floating off the ground. It just like wasn't real.
Wasn't real, yeah.
And then I get to the airport and I call the center. This was the Cornell, Michigan Center in Sevilla, and the person was talking, the coordinator, wonderful person, and met her later. And I just kept saying, "Como? Como?
Yes.
Como?" Finally, she resorted to English and she said,
realized,
"Your family is waiting for you. Go to the address we sent you." And but it was, one of the reasons I am such a proponent, and I do tell students, I am not at all promising that you're going to find the future love of your life and spouse of 30 years in November.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But it really is eye-opening. I mean, as much as you look at television and film and literature, and it's when you're actually on the ground interacting with people, and also hearing things about your country or your government, or I mean, it just absolutely eye-opening. So that was a tremendous experience. Yeah.
That's amazing. And it's one of those things that I wish I took part in when I was in college, because this topic has come up in other episodes where I guess I don't know, I had this whole misconception about studying abroad, that, oh, it's too expensive for someone like me, or like you said, just the fear of being somewhere where I don't necessarily know the language, or the customs, traditions, or things like that, and just getting over that fear. So was that a challenge for you too during that time?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
I mean, I felt completely out of my element.
Really?
And in fact, although it will be 30 years in November, my first date with my future wife came completely out of a misunderstanding.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. her sister had told her that somebody had called, probably an American, her apartment, and she went through different names, and it hadn't been me.
Really?
I mean, I was terrified of the phone, as you could see from my
Yes.
experience in the airport.
Right.
And and so she called me up, and I don't even remember what I said or what she said, but I know that I didn't fully understand, and I got off the phone, and I told my roommate, who was a student from U of M, and I can say this now because this was the parlance of the early 1990s. I said, dude, I think I just asked someone out on a date.
Really?
Really, truly. Yeah.
Oh,
No
that's so
idea.
interesting.
No idea.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Because of the language barrier
Oh,
a little
yeah.
bit. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And then look at you now.
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Thinking back on that experience, were there, did you study abroad more than once, or was that the only time?
That was it.
Oh, wow.
After college graduation, I went back and lived there for a year, doing some teaching English. And then the translator point was after 2001, went back for a few years and worked for a accounting. What's the word called? It was then Arthur Andersen.
Oh yeah.
And
I
then
remember.
Arthur Andersen. We were actually in Spain when Enron happened.
Oh wow.
And this was also after 9/11, and we were just sort of in the eye of the storm, and just kept getting these reports from these video reports from the main office, until suddenly there just weren't any reports, and they were saying don't shred anything.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But our office was, I mean, that was considered sort of the crown jewel of Europe. So they weren't in trouble at all, but it was quite an interesting time.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the reason I asked that was I've had a few guests who talked about their experiences with studying abroad, and Kripa Bhagat, she we got into this whole conversation about being in a foreign place and not knowing the language, and how you sort of have to learn how to communicate. Communicate nonverbal, without language to navigate, and so was that an experience for you as well? Or it sounds like it was early on. You set up a date without without knowing.
Yeah, it was. And, as you mentioned, Kripa, I'm thinking of, another way that this experience has helped me in terms of what I did and what I do now. And that is, understanding how challenging it can really be for our students, our international students who come over, even to the point where, we used to talk about first year orientation, right? But you have students who are showing up on the first day, and they're absolutely jet lagged, and it's just not something that I mean, I know intellectually, I guess I could have thought of it, or somebody would have told me, but the fact that I went through that myself, it's, thinking, we give them so much information, and thankfully we have these great orientation programs, so they get acclimated before the main training, the main program.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so fascinating, and so great. I love the story about how you how you met your wife, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. And like
Yeah.
you said, 30 years later,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I'm wondering, kind of fast forwarding a little bit.
Yeah.
So how did you end up becoming dean of Morse College?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I've told this story many,
Have you?
many times. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
So, I had taught a rhetoric and composition course at UT Austin. And part of the reason that I taught it and got connected to the writing center there was because our department, American Studies, had very, very little funding. And so you had to look elsewhere.
Mhm.
But there were these courses that the English department desperately needed people to teach. And the writing center, which was an incredible experience. I was what was called a writing consultant here. It's a writing tutor. And that may have been sort of my first kind of one-to-one with students in a real way where I helping them out with something related to writing and finding that they left in a bit of a better place than when they came, which was wonderful.
Right.
So I taught there, then went to Spain, and then came back. My wife, she's a professional pastry chef, and she had landed a job at the Union League.
Oh, wow.
And so we moved here, which was also close to our son's grandparents, my parents.
Oh, interesting.
And I applied on the advice of my my brother for a job for which I was not qualified.
Really?
I didn't have a
awesome.
PhD at the point,
Right.
and my brother said, "Just do it." And it was, I think, assistant director to the writing center.
Okay.
I had sent things to Yale, had never heard back, but Alfie Guy wrote me back. And which was very nice.
Yeah.
And not only that, he forwarded my resume to the English department,
Oh, wow.
to Janice Carlisle, who oversaw the English 114 program. And she called me up, interviewed me, and I took that job, and it was fantastic. Fantastic for the students. I thought that when I got in the classroom, because I didn't go to Yale, I thought some student would, when they got the C or D, because writing is hard.
Yes.
That
Challenge.
they would do something and say like, "Do you know who my father is?" And never happened. Never happened.
Okay.
I had wonderful students. I loved it.
That's awesome.
And I met some people who had been either residential college deans or associated with residential college dean program, and they told me about this. And the more I heard about it, I thought, this sounds really interesting. It's something I'd like to do.
Really?
And I went from dean to dean to dean, veterans, newer ones, and even former ones. And I just said, please give me the unvarnished version of this job. Tell me exactly what it's like.
Yeah.
And so I had started our interview by talking about how poor an interviewee I had been. But that was the first time I had actually done really well at interviews, because I really knew facets of the job, and I saw that it was something that I might really enjoy.
Interesting.
And I did. I loved it. It was, for me at that time, the best job I'd ever had. Very exhausting.
Yeah.
Could be very stressful. 24/7 feeling of being on, but it was incredibly rewarding. And I felt part of a community, which was fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you were Dean of Morse College. That was in 2017, right? Or I'm sorry,
2007 to 2017. Yeah.
Wow. So 10 years of nonstop.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What looking back on your time as Dean of Morse College, where are there certain memories that just kind of jump out as soon as you think of that time?
Well, I have learned that my memory is faulty, and I even and ironically, I do remember this. I remember telling my wife when I was 24 years old.
Mhm.
I swear this is true, Darice.
Really?
She will back it up. I
Okay.
said to her, I remember we were in Ithaca, New York.
Uh-huh.
We were in the Commons, and I said to her, when I'm middle aged
Mhm.
and I complain about having a bad memory,
Mhm.
please remind me that it was never that good to begin with. So, true story. But I say that because I find that when it comes to many things that happened in my past, it's a photograph or a
Mm.
video
Mhm. Mhm.
that will remind me. And I was
Okay.
just looking at old photos and seeing these photographs of these elaborate costumes that in some cases my wife made
Oh, wow.
of the three of us
Really?
with our son. Our son was 6 years old when we
Aw.
moved to Morse,
Really?
and all of these sort of fantastic experiences
Yeah.
that we had as a family.
Right.
Um, but you know, being it's funny. One thing I completely do not miss, but
Mhm.
I appreciated and enjoyed at the time,
Mhm.
is walking through campus and spotting, student after student after
Mhm.
student that I knew.
Mhm.
I mean, I knew those students,
Yeah,
hundreds of students,
which is
and and
amazing.
and and saying hi and connecting with them.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, it it's always along the lines of what I said about the writing center,
Mhm.
and I've been thinking about this a lot
Mhm.
because we're right now interviewing for um, new residential college dean
Mhm.
positions,
Mhm.
and um, just thinking about having those tough conversations with students.
Mhm.
There's a reason I think every dean probably has a box of tissues on
Mm.
their desk,
Mhm. Mhm.
and just knowing not necessarily being in a place where I could say or do something that was going to make any difference,
Right.
but just the act of listening
Mhm. Mhm.
and them feeling a little bit unburdened and a little
Mhm.
bit heard,
Mhm.
um, and them leaving in a better place than
Right.
they came, and that was just really uh, inspiring and it felt empowering.
Yeah. I can imagine. And, as you were sharing that, I still think of that day you mentioned where kids were throwing pennies at you, and
Yeah, yeah,
wondering like how that feeling connects to how you interact with students, and like you said, that compassion, and even if it was something that you couldn't change or do immediately, that you just wanted them to know, that they were being
yeah.
heard, and um that's awesome. I'm curious about, if you think about, if when you think about that, how, were there other things that just sort of fueled how you interacted with students? And I can only imagine, like, that must be so much pressure for 24/7
Yeah, yeah,
to be on, like you said.
yeah,
So how did you deal with that? Like, how were there times, where you had to sort of have that balance where, I can only imagine how draining that can be too.
yeah. It's a hard job for people to do for a very long
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
um, and for me, I probably left at just the right
Mm.
moment. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe I could have stayed for years more, and we have great deans who have stayed beyond a
Okay.
decade. There's nothing
Mhm.
magic about that
Yeah.
number.
Yeah.
Um, but I think part of it for me is uh, the just one, the feeling of being on,
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
and the having a family with you is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because students will sometimes recognize that, oh, so this family's having dinner.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the right time to ask about that dean's extension.
Right.
But also it's, you can't have, you can get to the point where you feel like you can't leave your guard down. And that can be rough. I remember when I was interviewed for that position by Frank Kyle, who was then the head, and he told me in the interview, as a way of sort of prepping me, said, when you go out there, one day, your zipper's going to be down, and are you going to be okay with that? And I was like, yeah, of course. And I was thinking, what is he saying?
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
My zipper's never going to be
Yeah.
down. Flash forward years
no. And it
later,
happened?
I'm sort of making my appearance, saying hi to everybody, go to the dining hall, come back. And my assistant says, oh, your zipper's down.
No.
I'm like, so, yeah, it's, and so but you have to be able to laugh with that and
Right.
say, because part of the power of this position and part of the power of the head's position too is, we want students, of course, we all deserve respect. The students deserve respect, but there are students who come in who are so incredibly intimidated by the idea of a Yale faculty member.
Yeah.
And the fact that they could see us sometimes in T-shirts or sometimes see us just be,
Yeah.
silly
Just
with our
normal.
kids or our
Yeah.
dogs or, helps, I hope, humanize
Absolutely.
those positions and make it, because one of the things that's key for dean success and a head success too is that they're accessible and approachable.
Yeah. I totally agree. Well, you made me think of two things. I was watching some cartoon with I have a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old and a soon to be 21-year-old in a few days.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And so my 10-year-old, we were watching a cartoon where these characters they saw their teacher, like they were preparing for the school year and they went shopping and they saw their teacher at the store and they were like, they come out, and they're not dressed like
Right.
like their normal school
Right.
attire, and
Right.
they do normal stuff, and it was just so cute because they were just like, I can't believe we saw so and so, but yeah, when I think back to my early years in the dean's office, it's the same feeling for staff too.
Yeah.
It's especially if you're new to Yale.
Yeah.
It's like, you feel this intimidation that,
Yes.
all sorts of things like that. Okay, maybe they won't, it's like imposter syndrome. Like, they'll
Yes,
think I'm
exactly.
not that smart, or I'll say
Yes.
something stupid, or,
Oh, absolutely, Darice. And
Yeah.
I actually remember feeling that way in graduate school.
wow. Yeah.
And the one thing that sort of helped in that vein was teaching. Because when I was teaching, and I was teaching the same courses that some, tenured professors were teaching, and I found out that they were actually interested in, what I was doing. They were looking,
Right.
everybody, I think good teachers are always looking for ways to improve and ideas that can make them more effective. And
Yes.
these were professors who were really invested in this course, and were interested in what I was doing and my fellow graduate students were doing.
Right.
So that was one point where it felt like, oh, so in a way, at least at this level, we're talking the same language,
Yes,
and
yes.
I didn't feel as as intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's so funny. So a lot of folks don't know that I kind of scaled back recently, but I teach too. So local schools. I've taught computer courses,
Hmm.
programming and that kind of stuff, and it happened by accident. um, yeah, that's a story in itself. But I didn't plan on teaching. It was just because I knew the material, and they
Yeah.
found me on LinkedIn, and the rest is history. But but yeah, you're right. It's I kind of feed off of my students end up having these ideas that it's like, yeah, I didn't,
Yeah.
I didn't think of things that way, and that's interesting. So let me, brush up on that area, and so that I can help someone who, um, if they have that interest or that enthusiasm
Yeah.
or energy to explore this area, I want to be able to offer some sort of guidance,
Right.
along the way, and that's something that I enjoy too.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious about once after your time as dean, did like you said there was a 10 years felt like a good time. Was it like because of feeling burned out, or was it just because you wanted a change?
No. So Mark Shanker, who was the dean of academic affairs at that time,
Mhm.
approached me and said, "Look, I think you'd enjoy this, and this would be good."
Mhm.
And I heard later that Joe Gordon, who was the deputy
Mhm.
dean, had discussed this with Mark and
Mhm.
said, "Yeah, but he'll never leave Morse,"
Really?
because I was, I
Yeah.
mean, I was way into it.
Uh-huh.
But what's amazing is um, it's so funny because when I started out as a dean,
Mhm.
and part of it was just loving it so much,
Mhm.
but part
Mhm.
of it was just, thinking what I get the most sort of joy and interest out of.
Yeah.
I thought, this is a position. This position didn't exist at that point, but a
Right, right.
position like this where I don't have regular
Mhm.
um, interactions with students, I really wouldn't. That's not
Mhm.
for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And flash forward. I mean, I love
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And part of it is that while I don't have as much interaction with students,
Mhm.
I still have a lot of interaction with residential college deans
Mhm. Mhm.
and their senior AAs as
Mhm.
colleagues, and then people across the campus
Yeah.
where it's I feel like I can be helpful, and I
Right.
feel like I can make some sort of difference. So
Mhm.
um, it's been a great position, and Mark was a fantastic mentor.
Mhm.
He one thing he got me to think about, certainly during my deanship, and even
Mhm.
to some degree in this position when I
Mhm.
worked for him directly,
Mhm.
is contextualizing. And we were talking before about how you see faculty or teachers or
Mhm.
others as sort of like, outside of that
Right,
role, and
right.
how that can humanize them.
Yeah.
And there was a point, and I'm so much more sensitive to it now because of him,
Mhm.
was just thinking about the full person. I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
um, if someone doesn't get back to you within 24 hours on an email,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate you, or
Right.
or,
Yes, yes.
or they don't think that you're worthy of their
Yeah,
attention,
yeah.
and who knows what's going on. There
Mhm.
could be a sick kid at home. There could
Right.
be something that happened in their personal life.
Mhm. Mhm.
It could just be that their supervisor said, "Look, I'm sorry, this is a surprise, but you have to
Mhm.
work on this now." And
Mhm.
so, trying to deliver a little bit of grace in our sort of
Yeah.
day-to-day
Right.
operations,
Mhm.
and so I learned a lot from him,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and I hope, I mean, it's always, you're always trying to do better, but
Right.
I hope I am a helpful, good
Mm-hmm.
colleague, because that's really that's one thing that I learned even when I started teaching at 114. I
Mm-hmm.
saw it even much more so when I was a college dean,
Yeah.
and I see it so much now, which is the collaboration and the
Mm-hmm.
collegiality,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it, I mean, I want to pick up the phone and
Right,
call
right.
Darice,
Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, because I love talking with her
Mhm.
and being in a position where people will feel comfortable reaching out to me and
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
help.
Yes, I know. And it's huge because, and I can even just speak on from my own personal experience. It's just that, like I said, coming in as a new
Yeah.
employee at that time, it was intimidating
Yeah.
yeah, you feel sort of like, oh, I don't want to bother that person, or
Right.
you're
Right.
apprehensive about reaching out, and or just reaching out for help.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was early on. You kind of feel like, are they going to think,
Are they
what?
going to think?
Yeah, what are they going to
Bingo.
think if I'm
Yes.
asking this
Yes.
question?
Yes.
And I don't. Yeah, it took a while for me to get over that, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Me
Um,
too.
I think it kind of it started changing as I got to know folks, and looking back, it's so important just to be able to have conversations with people, and
Yeah.
just to get to know people and where they're coming from, or
Yeah.
yeah, just to connect with them on a human level, and
Right.
then
Right. Right.
that
Right.
other stuff can go, kind of goes away because you don't really have that apprehension.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but yeah, that I'm so glad you shared that. So, I'm kind of fast forwarding again, but as you know, it's like, look at that, we're almost
Oh
up
my
on the.
gosh.
It goes by so fast. But you know, now in your current role,
Hmm.
are there, because you've been in your current role for a few years,
7
right?
years.
7 years,
Yeah.
more than a few. Um, are there, some experiences or maybe challenges that you've come across where, uh, it just changed your insight into, how you'd like to contribute to this role?
That is a tough
Is it?
question. Um, See, I didn't think this was going to turn into Barbara
Oh,
Walters.
no.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Um, well, you know, when I came into this position, um, one of the things that I wanted to do was think about what could make the dean's jobs
Mm,
more humane and more sustainable.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and I came in the job 2017, and the pandemic hit in
Right.
2020.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, a terrible year for
Mhm,
everybody. And
mhm.
um, but you could see the strain
Mm.
on. I mean, we all were under strain.
Right, right.
I remember nights and weekends just disappeared.
Yeah, they did.
I remember making policy decisions, which would have had a subcommittee or a working group for
Mhm,
months, and we did
mhm.
it like in 24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I still think about things that we can do to um, make not just make the jobs easier,
Mhm,
if that's even possible, but
mhm,
um, help make some of the things that can be challenges
mhm,
a little less challenging. And actually,
mhm.
I work with a lot with ITS
Mhm, mhm.
on the dynamic forms,
Yes.
and the fact that we can try to make the processes
Mm-hmm.
better.
Right.
When we introduced a double major form,
Mm-hmm.
a double major form is basically just it's a petition. We
Mm-hmm.
consider it as such, but it's basically an intent form. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to take these courses. I want to take a second major.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have forms, and I kid you not, I saw this myself,
Mm-hmm.
forms that would be sitting in a student's room for like 2 years.
Oh, really?
Because,
Because they did.
well, part of it is you'd have to go from office to office to office to get this signature, get that signature.
Yeah.
And we have students who were, they have jobs.
Yes. Yeah.
They have, of course, other activities. They may be
Mm-hmm.
varsity athletes. They have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of commitments in addition to
Right.
all of their schoolwork. And, they're not necessarily living
Mm-hmm.
on as much on the 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for, departments, it may be leave the form.
Right.
We'll let you know when it's in. We'll get. So we would have students running around, and we'd have dean's offices, in particular senior AAs,
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Well, this student is set to graduate. What's going
Oh,
on?"
yeah. Yeah.
Now this can be done in just a matter of days.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
just as soon as everybody responds to their email,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. Right.
And
Which is awesome.
it's the kind of thing that, and it hopefully makes the administrative, the
Mm-hmm.
bureaucratic
Mm-hmm.
component
Mm-hmm.
of the dean's offices a little easier, so that they can focus on the things. Not that, I think paperwork is important. I'd have to
Right.
in my role,
Right.
administrator.
Yes.
And I always tell new deans, behind whatever petition,
Mm-hmm.
whatever request, whatever email you're getting about this,
Mm-hmm.
is a person.
Right. Right. Yes.
And it's very important to them.
Yes.
But the fact that if they're spending so much of their time on these things which could be done quicker
Right.
and more efficiently, they're not spending as much time with the human element, the
Exactly.
one-to-one, the
Right. Right.
connections that we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up because, as you know, it's like that's why I'm here. You know what I mean? That's why I work in IT
Yeah.
and and I'd love to collaborate offline because I know aside from that process that you mentioned that there are
Mhm.
probably plenty of other instances where we could eliminate that sort of back and forth or
Yeah.
anyone doing like literal
Right.
legwork,
Right.
taking away that piece so that they could focus on the actual connection
Yep.
and which is so important, right? And I think over the years that many of our staff may think, oh, she's too busy, so I won't bother her with this. And I'm like, no, bother me.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
this is what I need to know,
Yeah.
so that I can make your jobs not just easier, but like you said, take away that component so that you can focus on
Right.
the connection. So
It's not that component is unimportant. It's just
Exactly.
there may be a better way to do
right,
it.
right, or simplify it.
Simplify
and-
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should chat.
We will.
Yes,
We will.
yes. Wow, see, it's already, our time is already running out, but I'm wondering if, if you could share any tips. Like we talked about, your role is Dean of Morse and I'm curious how, again, like how did you have special things you would do to maintain that sort of work-life balance where it didn't become overwhelming?
Well, I mentioned before the advantage and disadvantage of having the family, and to some extent, I fully admit that I used my family as a shield.
You really?
But in seriously, I would say, we have plans. We're going out to do something. But I think I used to do more jogging with my dogs,
Really?
and even though I would see and wave to students, they did not, run to catch up to me and say
Really?
"Dean, Dean,
Yeah,
Dean."
yeah.
And we haven't traveled as much in the last years, but when we were Dean, that was something that we did because, gosh, I remember. It doesn't really make a difference now because of Zoom and because of email and everything. But I remember the first winter as a dean, we went to Montreal.
Oh, nice.
We drove to Montreal. We went there, and I was able to say in my automated response, and it really shouldn't even then have meant as much as it did to me. I am out of the country.
Oh, yes.
I cannot respond
and you can't
to
respond to your
which wasn't necessarily true at that point either.
Right.
But I think having some physical separation was helpful.
Yeah.
And I published an article at the time, and having that focus back into sort of the intellectual element.
Yes.
Was also helpful, but mostly it was family that kept me sane.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. So I'm curious about, early on we talked about your hobbies and that you like to indulge in crossword puzzles and also binge watching the detective shows.
yeah.
So I'm curious, do you have a preference of crossword puzzles? Is it New York Times or?
I actually so years ago I discovered that the New Yorker had online crossword puzzles. This is going to be something that younger listeners to the podcast are going to be like, well, isn't that the only way that they're done?
Exactly.
But I found that
pencil,
exactly. Well, I found that so cool because you can then immediately check the word.
Yes.
Now it feels a little bit like cheating,
right?
So I enjoy that. That's something that helps me sometimes fall asleep at night too.
Really interesting.
And you had asked about detective series. My wife and I have gone through all the Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie's.
Interesting.
We went through the Miss Marples, and now we're sort of, and this was prompted by my mother. We are going through all the episodes of Monk.
Oh, wow.
And Monk was interesting because part of it is the concern is here's a main character who is playing someone, he's not himself, playing someone with mental illness.
Right.
And the concern is, well, is he just doing this? Is the show just doing this for laughs? Is this at the expense of right. And what the show does is essentially humanize him. And not only just because he has the gifts that he has of solving all these crimes, but also you really and genuinely and truly feel for him and appreciate that aspect. And it's not necessarily the best stories, but it is fun to see how, in part, the sheer act of paying close attention, looking to detail, which probably is what ties our interest in all three of those. Seeing something that's right there, but no one else sees.
That you didn't notice initially.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. So do you tend to binge watch over the weekends or every now and then?
So it's usually like we'll watch maybe an episode a night.
Oh, okay, got it.
And and being the age I am now, it's sort of like one, maybe two things we watch, and then it's like, that's it. I'm to bed. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I always like when I turn on a series, I'm like, I have to watch the same episode about 4 times because I doze off at certain moments, and I'm like, I missed it. Now I gotta.
See, I accept myself. I remove myself from the room. But it is true. Sometimes we'll see something like, oh, here's a movie,
Right,
and
right.
like, I don't really want to interrupt it 45 minutes through, but I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
I'm going to have to get myself up to bed.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. Awesome. So I'm curious too about. I know you're a fan of Spanish cuisine,
Mm-hmm.
and do you have some favorite dishes that come to mind?
Oh, yeah.
Hmm.
So, again, Alba, my wife, a
Hmm.
professional chef,
Hmm.
she makes croquetas,
Oh.
um, uh, uh, tortilla de patatas. It's
Mm.
like a sort of, I can't call it an omelet, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and paella. I mean,
Oh,
all the hits. I
yeah.
mean, and it's what she makes at home
Yeah.
using our home stove, our home,
Hmm.
not the professional restaurant equipment
Right,
and
right.
everything. What she makes is as good or better than
Yeah. What you
what's in
go,
restaurants.
yes. Oh
So
my
it's
gosh.
I am a lucky
Yes,
man.
you are. Now we're all coming to Joel's for dinner. um, that's so awesome. And so Joel, we could chit chat all day, and but I have a few more questions for you just to wrap up,
Sure.
and we'll definitely have to connect, for multiple reasons,
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
but just looking back on your journey, like are there certain parts of your career that you're most proud of?
Um, I got a email after I'd announced that I was stepping down as dean of Morse.
Hmm.
I got an email from a student who I hadn't heard from years. He was an alum,
Mm-hmm.
and he told me that um, when he met with me, and I was trying to help him, he was really struggling.
Hmm.
And he said that when I had talked with him, raised the idea of going to counseling,
Mm-hmm.
he said, I really resented that. I really
Mm-hmm.
resented you doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And he struggled for years. And then he said, he had a stint in the military, and then he went to applied and got into med school. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, I was just going past the med school and the counseling center,
Mm.
and I just stepped in, and it changed my life.
Wow.
And I just want to know how much I appreciate all the care you took, everything that you taking the time to talk with me. I
Yeah.
was just, it
Wow.
was one of those emails where it just sort of takes your breath
Yeah.
away, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like you hope that you are able to help
Mm-hmm.
students,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes it's just planting a seed that
Yeah.
doesn't really come to fruition until years later. And
Right.
you may never know whether you've been helpful, but
Yeah.
to get that sort of um, confirmation
Mm-hmm.
that what we're doing
Mm-hmm.
is actually helping someone is
Yeah.
just incredibly gratifying.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
love that story. And, I, one of my early guests, Anita Sharif Hyder,
Hmm.
mentioned how she tries to approach every interaction as you never know if that interaction for that moment
Right.
could have an impact on someone, whether it's just for today or maybe years later.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, the thought is amazing to think that years later, I don't know how long, how far removed this alum was, but um, to think that years later that they thought to reach out to you to tell you that that particular day that you mentioned this,
Yeah.
um, maybe in the moment didn't resonate, but it resonated later
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And it's something I don't know that you don't always think about as we go about our days and do what we do,
Right.
um, but yeah, I mean that's an amazing. It must be an amazing feeling to think like, okay, that's yes, the work the work I'm doing, we know it's important, but you know what
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's that like sort of reaffirming thought that
Right.
you have an impact that's not just for today, but it's a lifelong impact, which is amazing. Um, Looking back on if you look back to when you were let's say 18 and starting your college years, is there any advice you would have given your younger self?
Well, I was very involved in lots and lots and lots of activities when I was in high school. And I don't know to what extent maybe I had burned out a little bit.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
when I went to college, I was just like, oh, it's all the life of the mind. And I'm
mm-hmm,
just, I just dove
mm-hmm.
into academics.
Right.
Um, I My advice would have been to get involved in one or two
Mm.
extracurriculars.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
really mean it when I say to Yale students, you're going to get a great education. You have amazing classes, but and I'm not at all. I mean, my title, director of
Mm-hmm.
academic and educational affairs, I care about academics.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
number one to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not at all dismissive of that. But it is true that some of the extracurriculars and some of what you learn outside of the
Yeah. Yeah.
classroom is as important or even more important than what you
Right.
learn in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And so I think that would probably be the advice. The other advice, which comes also throughout the textbook that we're
Mm-hmm.
putting out for college students, which
Mm.
there's a focus on particularly in non-traditional
Yeah.
college students,
Mm-hmm.
is ask for help.
Yes.
And we talked about humanizing before. We talked about,
Yes.
but it is often what we often see is that students who come to college without perhaps as many resources as
Mm-hmm.
other students,
Mm-hmm.
they're less likely to reach out for help because
Right.
that hasn't been part of their experience in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just the enabling, empowering students to ask for help when they need it,
Mm-hmm.
and not to hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's super important.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I totally agree. I think that can apply for students and even just staff.
Sure, absolutely, yeah,
New staff or I don't want to say old staff, but new staff or current staff,
seasoned
seasoned
staff.
staff. There's a good one. Yeah, I think it uh, it may feel challenging at first, but like you said, all of these things we talked about in terms of just humanizing uh, things. It's important for people to feel comfortable and safe enough to approach others and
Right,
feel that they can ask for help. And it sounds like it's so easy to just say, hey, I need help, but it for some people it's so it's a challenge to
right.
really open up, and because it's almost like you're showing folks feel that it's showing vulnerability. And
But it's also, I talked about the moment and in seventh grade.
yeah, yeah.
Um, it's also a concern, I think, about how you, and if you represent any group, how
Yes.
that group is going to be perceived.
Perceived, yeah, yes.
Well, and that's something that I understand. I have faced almost no sort of direct prejudice that it's very, very little minor things. But I do understand that there's a perception, you're worried about, am I going to be seen as me, or am I going to be seen as this group?
Exactly.
And I am representing my community. And are people going to think I can't hack it? Or, am I going to sound dumb? Again, it goes back to the imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. And I think that's just so important. Like you said, just creating that safe space for students and and hopefully with everything that we've been doing and working on in this podcast and just everything, having that same feeling for staff as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We could talk all day, right?
Well, we're just going to have to get together and continue the conversation.
I know, we definitely have to, because I do. I enjoy connecting with you, but also, for all of the work reasons too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But because I'd love to be a resource for that too, and to, like I said, it's like take away that technical, complicated piece so that staff can focus on, the important stuff. Well, I shouldn't put it that way, but you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I know totally.
So they can focus on the connection with students
right.
So Joel, thank you so much for, coming today and being, just being willing to sit and chit chat with me.
Total pleasure.
Awesome.
Very honored. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. My pleasure. And I hope that when our listeners hear this episode that, they've just gained, all of your, I think, because even just talking to you, I gained some valuable insights just into the world of, academia, but also just educational leadership, and learning about your experience at becoming Dean of Morse College. And also the importance of creating that safe space for students and to help foster their a supportive community for their success. So Joel, thank you so much again, and I hope see, I told you I wouldn't bite, but I just really appreciate I just appreciate you as a colleague and getting to know you over the years. And like you said, I mean, it's hard, when I think back to that time, I'm like, gosh, it's hard to even think
it really
been that
is.
long.
It really is.
So, it's just always been a pleasure, collaborating with you. And, I just look forward to future collaborations
Absolutely,
and working together. Awesome.
Thank you, Darice.
Thank you. So we're going to end today, but, again, I hope our listeners, just feel inspired by your story, study abroad. We talked about studying abroad. You may meet your future partner, which I find that's so awesome because you know what I mean? It's like you weren't, you probably, you weren't looking and it just happened. And, but yeah, I just hope everyone finds your stories, inspiring. And just until next time, to keep exploring and talking, and talk to people and get to know folks, because I think it just changes.
Yeah.
It has continuously changed how I interact with everyone. And I just so happy that we could do that today.
Me too. Very, very happy.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'm going to share it with my mom.
Yes, please do. Yes. And I always tell everyone, please, yes, absolutely share it with everyone, not just Yale College or Yale folks, but share with everyone. But yes, thank you. And I'm just going to sign off for now.
All right. Thank you, Darice.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel.